seekers, WYLD of WYLD Tarot and Wild Moon Medicine Collective here, and I'm so juiced up and excited for this conversation today with my friend and peer, Dr. Cathleen King. She's joining us. She has an amazing story of how she entered her work, and I'm just really delighted to share her medicine and her magic with you today. So, welcome so much, Dr. Kat, to the
Thank you.
podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, Wild. I'm so glad to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm so glad. So, we go back a number of years. We've met through several women's circles as well as our five rhythms practice. And I've had the delight to taste some of Dr. Kat's medicine, and she has received from me as well. So, it's just really fun when healers start to work together and bring one another into each other's spaces. So, I think this will be a really nice chat.
Mhm, mhm.
So, as you enter into the studio today, what are you feeling? How are you feeling? Mind, body, heart, and soul. What's alive for you?
Well, first of all, I'm so grateful to be able to have this conversation with a friend. This world where we've been so isolated with each other, and I moved away from the Hood River area where you live. So it's so nice to connect. So I can feel this full heart of communion with a like-minded soul sister. Feels
Mm.
really good. And also recognizing how this meeting with a friend is so important as work is so busy and life is so busy and just this, oh my gosh, I need more of my soul sisters in my life. So I'm being reminded to carve out those time blocks, hopefully not just for podcasts, but for gatherings. I remember the days where it was like our life was so much more open. I had time for the women's circles, I had the time for going dancing, I had the time for the yoga classes, and realizing like, where did all that go? We're doing output, output, output. And it seemed like so many years there, it was, kind of input, self-care, transformation, getting to know. And so that balance has kind of gotten tipped. And I'm being reminded of that right now, just sitting here with you.
Mm. I love that self-awareness and naming the ebb and flow.
Mm-hmm.
Just naming it. This is how life is. And so I'm hearing that you're in a space in your life where you're really offering and perhaps needing some more receiving.
Yes. Yeah, I think that you've nailed it. And we get on this groove of offering and it's going well, and then all of a sudden our free time comes down to almost zero. And while that feels wonderful, I know that the receiving is part of what gives birth to the offering, and so I can feel that own ebb in my life right now very strongly.
Yes, yeah. I'm feeling this sensation of hearing you riff maybe on how does this relate to being a woman in a birthing modality? Like you are pushing the edges of a new way of blending healing and science. And yet we're still operating in a patriarchy. We're still operating in capitalism, And so what I'm kind of hearing in your language is maybe some shadows of that push of that culture. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yep.
And I'm so curious, like, how do you navigate that when you're really attempting to build a new culture and a new way of operating from the inside out?
I think for me, because I study the nervous system so much, first of all, I'm recognizing that my nervous system, even when I try to go and rest, has that go button on and that push, that more masculine energy. And maybe there's more like of the thinking going on, like the numbers, the to-do list, the checklist. And I'm like, okay, most of my thoughts right now are in all of these very action, 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 masculine. And I'm actually noticing I'm not feeling the sensations of what's going on right now, or the creativity dropping in. I can feel that is missing. And so for me, I think first of all, it's noticing, well, clearly my nervous system has this birthing has now turned into like a push. And sometimes there's stages where that has to happen. We have a deadline, a launch or whatever. And yet there needs to be some type of action to interrupt that, or it's going to continue in its momentum. And that's what I've noticed. I just had a huge launch, big push, and yet that behavior in my nervous system is still going, even though the launch just happened. So now it's like, okay, my nervous system's still turned on. I need an action step. Maybe that's, I had to cancel a bunch of one-on-ones. I, blocked out time. Like I have to give an abrupt stop, or this momentum that has the shadow energy that's gotten, that gives birth to some of that ability to push through a launch. Thank you for the shadow that is there to help me push, but now I need to let that dissolve out. So for me, it's nervous system awareness and recognizing when when it's gotten out of balance, and the need for that ramped stage of the nervous system that might be in need to get a launch is now not necessary. So I need to interrupt it.
Yeah, I really appreciate your transparency here. I think it's something that's missing in a lot of these conversations is acknowledging your own humanness and that you're doing the same healing work that you're offering your clients,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Like we're all in this together as messy humans. We're just at different stages along the path. And
Yes.
I'm now recognizing as we started this conversation, we didn't really give an opportunity for you to express what you do. Like I'm like, "Oh yeah, I get you, but can you let my people know like what do you do with the nervous system?
Yeah.
What's your jam?"
Well, my jam is nervous system regulation, brain retraining, and helping people who have chronic illness patterns or trauma patterns or just general mental unrest regulate their body. And I do that through a combination of neuroscience based tools, somatics, and also inner work like inner attachment repair, developing what I call a healthy adult main personality. And I even add in a lot of energetics, and I have my own version of woo woo, as you know. um, but ultimately, it's to help people embody their nervous system with their true self essence. And we have a lot of programming keeping us out of our own bodies, and unfortunately, our nervous system can work against us in our in our journey of transformation and embodiment and getting our true message out in the world. So I'm really helping people to learn how to be the conscious creator in their life through self-regulation, through understanding their nervous system, through partnering with their nervous system and teaching it a new program in a new
Mm,
way.
mm, mm. I keep hearing this word bantered about biohacking. Is that similar to what you're doing? Would you
Yeah.
consider yourself a biohacker?
Yeah, I would say that we are hacking the limbic system and the way that it has been programmed to interpret the world as threat, our foods as threat, environmental stuff as threat, partners as threat. So we're hacking that set point that's been in the nervous system for a while, as far as, everything's a threat. How can I be safe? And instead, reprogramming the limbic system to expect good things, expect that it is safe. You're safer and better off bringing your true self to the world. And so, yeah, there's kind of a hack of the nervous system, and I would say even down to the brainstem level, with my work.
Oh, that sounds so fun. Yeah, I love this idea of it's quantum, right? Like we recognize ourselves in so many different layers. We are this body, but we also have this energetic piece that you spoke about, and we have our mental body and our emotional body. Um, I'm curious how your work kind of weaves all of those together. Do you do this mainly through meditation? Like how do you get past these blockages that we've all been indoctrinated with?
It's a really good question. So when you're doing nervous system work, typically we're working with our memories, and we're working with our sense of presence, and we're working with our senses. And so I start with helping people to get really in touch with perceiving their reality, whether it's their past or their future, through getting in touch with their senses and seeing things differently. And in that, there is a type of meditation component, there's a visualization component, there's a sensory component. But what happens is when you light up your brain in a certain way and a certain, how can I say, certain type of communication starts to happen in the brain, you open up your consciousness to a higher presence, a higher awareness. And that's where the energetic starts to come through. And you start to get more of a perception of the energetic world because you've gotten so present, so in tune with your own senses that that brain state takes you to a higher perspective. And then from the energetic realm, you can repattern anything. That's where the rubber, really meets the road there. So it's a staged process where you're first working on, hacking your memory structures, and you're starting to get more into presence. And as you do that, you carve what I call this adult main personality brain state, which is the state of your most pure self in terms of like ego, like this is my personality and this is who I am without apology. And in that brain state of being present, this is who I am, this is what I like, there's a doorway that opens up for presence with our essence, more of that energy that can come through as well. So it's kind of a multi-layered process. And that's what I mean by mixing science a little bit with the energetics. And so I don't know if that answers the question, that we're kind of hitting different pieces with the work I do.
Yeah, I love that. And for someone who might be listening who's pretty new to even the idea of nervous system regulation, how could one, what are some, I don't know if symptom is the right word, but what are some flags to be like, "Oh, I think my nervous system is dysregulated."
The easiest one is when you wake up in the morning, do you feel not okay? Do you feel a sense of alarm? Do you have a sense of like resistance about going into your day? When
Hmm.
you wake up, you tend to, like, your nervous system is, you're most aware of what's actually happening in your nervous system. And if you're kind of like, oh gosh, is this okay? Am I okay? I'm worried about that. I'm resisting going into the world. You know that your nervous system set point might be in a state of fight, flight, or freeze, just based on that beginning of the day. That's the best time, I'd say, to really, if you're new, you just check in with yourself. How do you feel when you wake up?
Mm, that's an easy one. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
hmm And what brought you to this type of work? I mean, this is very specific.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
what brought me here, it's a good question. I was very ill for many years with, lots of labels like chronic Lyme disease, mold toxicity, hormone issues. I mean, lots of stuff. Um, Very debilitated. And I went from doctor to doctor and spent tens of thousands of dollars and did all of these treatments. Even did the shaman route, the energy route, the Western medicine route, and I was still sick.
mm,
And at the end of the day, I realized like all of this efforting was getting me nowhere, of wanting something outside of me to fix me. And so I thought, well, what am I left with? Like, what's within my control? Like, maybe I can't control Lyme disease. I can't control these genetics. I can't control these other things. What's within my control? And fortunately, I had a background as a physical therapist, and I used to work with chronic pain in the brain. And I knew that the brain could modulate chronic pain, and that you could actually, rewire your pain response. And so that got me into looking into, well, if I can control my brain state, which I know is true through neuroplasticity, maybe this will help with my body. And it set me on the path of understanding how to rewire my own perception of reality, rewire my own limbic response to my reality. And sure enough, my body started to shift. And it was just this path of recognizing what was within my control and what wasn't. And that's how I started to just focus on nervous system regulation as my treatment for disease. And not only did it treat the disease, but it helped me with, my entire consciousness and childhood patterning and trauma wounding, through basically repatterning my perceptions, which to me, brain rewiring is actually a form of self-shamanism. As you get
mm,
practicing it, it is a way of journeying yourself with a particular algorithm of hitting different brain structures and opening you up to new possibilities. And in that repatterning of the brain, it repatterns the energy field, and it goes on from there.
Wow. I love that. And I love the empowerment that feels so tangible in that statement of self shamanism. Like we really are our own healers,
Mhm.
and we all need support from time to time to step onto these paths, but we are the ones that are doing the work.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's through our choice and our perception. And it comes down to that again and again. And a lot of people are like, well, you don't understand. I have this really hard life, or I had this hard childhood. And I'm like, I hear you, sister. I had it all. And I found a way to repattern my perception, not to gaslight myself of what happened, but to see things differently in the entire overall picture. And in that repatterning, I had a pretty big victim consciousness those years I was sick. I had a really big sense of I have been oppressed. You know, I grew up in severe poverty, illiteracy, sex abuse, child abuse, all of that. And I had a lot of justification for my illness and my trauma patternings. And I had to, embrace that, yes, these are things that happen. And there's another way to see this. And there's another way to see me, more importantly. Like me, Kathleen, the essence of me was never damaged. I may have had experiences. And in that, I was able to repattern my sense of self. And in that repatterning of self, the body also repatterns itself.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I love that. I'm hearing a sense of deep acceptance of what was, and then allowing yourself to see the gifts that came through the experience rather than focusing on that victim
Yeah.
consciousness.
And to see how I was actually always intact, getting in touch with the essence that was there in the turbulence, that was a shining star, wasn't ever touched. And I talk in my work about finding this imperturbability inside of you. And when you find that, you realize, like, I was always okay. There was a part of me that was always okay. And when the limbic system and the brainstem start to um, see that conscious perspective, it changes its function.
Mm, mm. Would you like it changes its function literally on a physical level?
Yeah, absolutely. The biochemical cocktails that are released into your body are now coming from the consciousness of I'm inherently okay, safe, and enough. And that's what, sends the signal from the amygdala down into the hypothalamus, which creates all these chemicals that go into our body. If that signal is a different signal, the consciousness is sending a signal to the amygdala, I'm okay, I'm not okay.
Right.
And in that in that transmission of getting in touch with essence, there can be a reset. And there are a lot of, that's how I think divine healings happen, near death experiences, radical healings from shamans. They get in touch with that sense of identity that was never damaged, and that identity almost drops into the autonomic nervous system and then runs a new pattern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That gives a lot of hope, I think, for people who have experienced extreme trauma, like this
Mm.
ability to get back to that person you were born into this world as previous to
Yes.
the trauma. And this comes up a lot in my own work with clients is this identifying a sense of safety in the body. Like safety is super up. I mean, we're 2 years into a pandemic. Fear is rampant in our collective consciousness right now. And I'm so curious, does your work does it reprogram to this sense of safety as in I am responsive to my environment rather than this sense of safety because of my environment? Does that make sense?
Explain it a little bit more clearly.
Um, what I see a lot in my clients is we're all searching for safety outside of ourselves. We want everyone else to
Mm-hmm.
adjust to make us safe. We want the rules and all of the things to make us safe. And from my perspective, what I've seen is that when we come to a place of I'm safe because I'm in my body and therefore I can respond to this inherently dangerous world,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that it becomes lighter.
Yeah. And I think the answer is both. When your perception starts to shift We've got to remember that as within is without. So our perception filter in our brain about our own self will get mirrored to the external environment. So this is what's been my experience. The more that I have ground into my own safety of my body, for example, with the whole pandemic, I have a strong, I have had to carve a strong sense of my own safety in my own immune system, my body's capacity, and really come to know and believe in that. As I come and believe in my own safety, or even just my own safety existentially, like even if something were to happen, I'm still inherently okay. So even on that level, the brainstem, the limbic system start to have a sense, start to shift their filters into safety, and they will start to see in the world, oh, I see how I am being supported here. I see how this is, different than what I thought. And we start to see safety externally. The same thing happens, in the clients I work with who have like environmental toxicities like mold or whatever. They rewire their own nervous system into safety, and then they can actually handle being in a moldy environment, for example, like what wasn't safe becomes safe. So, it's all one great whole. But I think that the most direct path is starting with our own sense of safety, both believing in our body's resiliency, but even more in our the essence that is imperturbable. Like there, you can get in touch with that there is no ending of life, if you will. There is just this beautiful eternal nature, and let that inform your subconscious mind, inform the limbic system. It shifts the filters in our brain to see the world differently. And then we're able to go out there without so much guarding, because we're part of life itself, nature itself that ebbs and flows. And there's nothing wrong with an ebb. There's nothing wrong with the winter and with some leaves falling and some trees dying and some new trees birthing itself. We're part of all of it. And I think that's the reset that starts to happen on a deep level.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Mm. How long in your personal journey would you say it took to you for you to achieve this sense of safety in your body? I know you're still ebbing and flowing, but
Yeah. But I hear you. So when I was serious about brain retraining, I did it for an hour a day. I was really ill and I was dedicated. And I would say within the first few weeks, I started to have a massive change in my nervous system. My chronic panic attacks went away. My anxiety went down. But it took me a solid year for me to shift out of like Lyme disease patterning and severe nervous system trauma reactions. Um, Usually the science says that when you focus on this kind of stuff, a good 6 months is what it takes to retrain and repattern. It takes like 10,000 repetitions of seeing your reality differently. So that's from a physical level. Now, I think that you can have an experience that's energetic or spiritual that can cause a reset much quicker. And many people do. They just get this sense of like, oh my gosh, there's nothing inherently wrong with me. And they just start healing. So it just depends, but it does require repetition. That's the thing about brain retraining and nervous system work. You're working with patterning that's very ingrained in our nervous system. So it does take a little while.
but I mean, even a year is not that big
Yeah.
of a commitment when you
Yeah.
consider where you've come from.
Yes. And then there's a continuation because we're still living life. I still have to use my practices, especially if something new flares up in relationship or with my kids, and it's an old program that gets surfaced. I might need to use my tools more during that time. And then there's some times where I frankly just feel good and I'm okay. And that's wonderful. And you celebrate those times.
hmm Have you noticed an uptake in your need to use brain retraining as your business has blossomed and grown and you've been in the push for so long?
I would say at this stage, it's less about brain retraining and more about somatic presencing. Um, I feel like I've really wired in perceptions. Like I can catch my perceptions that are off pretty quickly, but it's the taking the time to be present. So that would be brain retraining is like step one, and somatics is step two in my program. And taking the time to be more present in my body and give myself space of just nothingness, focusing on nothing, nowhere, no one. That is where I am needing to spend time with, is more presencing at this stage. Earlier in my career, like a year or two ago, I needed to brain retrain a lot as I was launching and doing new things because it was, a bigger exposure into the public world, and I was hitting some brainstem programming there. But I went through a lot of that stage. So at this point, it's a lot more about just simply getting more into that feminine essence of presence and just, allowing myself to flow and being out of action for a little bit.
Mm, mm. Would you say that a part of your work is that integration of the electric and the magnetic, the masculine and the feminine in
Mm-hmm.
the brains, like literally the two halves of the brain?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of brain retraining is you're using your own thoughts. So the electrical, that's the electric, the masculine, you're creating perception, you're creating thought. And then you're to get into your sensory experience, the feeling and the energy, which is the feminine. So it's about both for sure. And we tend to have one that we're really good at and one that we resist. I've been really, I would say, lacking in my presence and just sitting here and just letting myself enjoy this cup of tea for 5 minutes and not getting back to that email or looking outside and just being in this present moment, or even just sitting and celebrating my work and how well it's going and just allowing myself to absorb that. That's where I am out of a balance right now.
I love that you're calling that in.
Mhm.
Yeah. And and just acknowledging with transparency that this is the work. Like we're all
Mhm.
doing it all the time. And yeah, I love that. I love keeping things peer to peer. Like we may have more information in our brains, but like we're still human.
Same pattern, still the same pattern.
Still the same pattern. You might just catch it quicker and be like, "Oh, I know
Yeah.
what I'm doing." Silly me. I like to say, "Look at my cute little brain. Look what my cute little brain is doing."
Yeah. Yeah. And we have so much. I think we have we're getting bombarded with so much information. I know even just keeping up on my like social media and stuff, it's like it's just draining. So not only is it our own launching and our own business, but it's this all that stimulation, the electromagnetic waves, the consciousness that's ramped and vigilant. And it's like now more than ever, we should be doing those self-care practices we did a few years ago when we were going to yoga and song circle and dance, and yet they've gotten pushed out. Fortunately, I think they really helped to give birth to our ability to, or helped us to be able to give birth to this time. But I'm really, really missing that time reality right now.
Yeah, I think the universe is hearing you make a request.
Yes, loud and clear.
It's coming your way already, I can tell. Well, you mentioned that in your work you have a little thread of woo-woo in there. Would you be interested in sharing with us
Sure.
what that means to you?
Yeah, so I work a lot with the superconscious. You might call it the higher self. It's how I help people repattern their memory structures. I call it a brain rewiring attunement. And I also, work with the chakra system and ancestral patterns. And so when I'm working with people in a group or one-on-one, a lot of times I bring them into a particular brain state. And, much like a shaman, I look into the field of what I see, what patterns I see, and call out different memory structures or part-time personality archetypes that show up, and highlight these particular patterns so that the person's consciousness can see the patterns in their active experience. We need to see a pattern to rewire it, and often it's just seeing the pattern. So for me, I do a lot of pattern remodeling using the help of the superconscious and the higher self. And it's really fun. It's been, I'd say my gift is I'm a pattern seer. I'm a pattern recognizer, almost to, I used to say my brain was somewhat autistic. Um, and that I can just, read material and see the patterning and put programs together and see the patterning. But I also have that ability to just sit in the field and sit with somebody. And whereas their patterning years ago used to maybe trigger me because maybe I'd see abuse patterning or illness patterning or whatever, now because of my own journey, I can sit and be more neutral to it and just speak it And in that speaking it with neutrality, there isn't a charge, so that they can see it. They can see that patterning more easily. And I'm not the one doing any remodeling of their memories. It's actually their higher self being allowed to see it along with their conscious self that allows the memory repatterning to be done. Our higher self is aware of all of our memories. It's aware of all the patterns within us, but we have subconscious blocks that keep our active brain from seeing these things because they were deemed as threat. And so my job is to try to help highlight those things that were suppressed into the active experience so that the person who's listening, their higher self, can repattern that memory structure. So again, it's a little woo-woo, but it's really cool stuff. And there's actually a lot of science behind this. There's some leading scientists that are doing these functional MRIs while they're doing these similar things as brain rewiring attunements. They often call them a recode, and talk to the superconscious and watch on these functional MRIs, these brain patterns, the neurology start to find each other just by speaking. Okay, higher self, please find the memory structure where this resistance pattern first began, bring it up into the active experience, do a complete rewrite, and you'll watch it on the MRI actually shift. So I think that this is where science and energy medicine and shamanism are starting to bridge, and that we're going to see a lot more of this in the coming future timeline, I hope, because it allows for rapid rewire, allows for things that have been suppressed to come up into the active experience because our higher self is now aiding in that process. So that's a little bit of the woo-woo.
I love that. And what's catching my ear is that it's the, it's bringing it to consciousness from a neutral place without shame or judgment.
Yeah.
So this person is allowing themselves to be witnessed.
Mm-hmm.
They're being shown their truth without judgment, and then they have access to direct source consciousness, their higher self, in order to take away that emotional stigma.
Yeah. And I think that in some ways, what you're doing is similar with the tarot. You're bringing patterning to consciousness in a safe way to witness it through symbols and archetypes that can bypass that subconscious programming. The person sees the pattern. I know for me, when I've worked with you, it's been like a brain rewiring attunement for me. I see the patterns in the cards. You're speaking the patterns without, it's just another form. It's the same algorithm, just a different modality. It's your own way of doing it. And that algorithm is being used, it's been used for all time. And we're just all finding our own unique ways of expressing it.
Yep, I would say I definitely am a pattern reader too, for sure.
Yes,
And
you
I
are.
love that you brought in the cards because that brings me to the Chariot, which is the card that we're going to talk about a little bit today. That was one of the last cards I pulled for you. What did we say? Was that 2 years ago? A year?
I think it was about almost a year and a quarter
A
ago, because
year
it
and
was
a
like October a
quarter.
year ago, right before
Yeah.
my work really took off.
Uh-huh. Yep. And that is all about patterns as well. That is about, going through the loops over and over again till we decide to change direction,
Mm-hmm.
change angle. And I'm curious, do you feel as though you're such a good pattern watcher because you've also been doing that work yourself? Like patterns have been a big deal in your life.
Yeah. And truthfully, what I think gives birth to a pattern recognizer is someone who maybe grew up in a situation where they needed to recognize patterns of safety or danger for their own survival.
Yeah.
And I think that's what allowed my brain to be rewired into a pattern recognizer.
Mhm.
Now I'm using that for a different reason. Instead of, I always say that like that highly sensitive empath that can see patterns, it can be a trauma pattern to be an empath, but you can take that gift and use it differently. And that's what I'm doing. But yeah, I've been reading patterns my whole life.
Yep. Yep. Same, same.
Yep.
So it's the wounded healer archetype. Like you
Mhm.
have managed to take your core wound and turn it into the gift that you are sharing with the world.
Yes. Yes. As
Yeah.
are you, my dear. As are you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so this speaks to the beginning of our conversation. The card you wanted to invite more of in was temperance and learning this balance and learning how to Stabilize the flow so that it doesn't feel like a push, but it feels more like uh, the magnetic river that it's meant to be. And I'm so curious now that we're talking about it, now that there's juice flowing, what feels like your first natural steps to make this happen in your reality?
I love that. That's the question I always ask right after an attunement. Here you, we're always right in sync. Um, as you're speaking and just meeting with you, Wild, like I see that my feminine friendship I have put on the back burner at the in-person meeting. So I feel like one of the very next step is to reach out to, the women that I've met here and, get on the calendar a meetup time and to try to make that a regular thing like I used to do in Hood River with all you guys. Um, that seems really potent. That's what's going to drop me into more of that feminine energy and fill me. That's one piece. And just being more clear with my boundaries. I think the next thing is like, how can I make the weekends the weekends? Like, how can I literally drop into family and like, can I find a discipline to put all the online stuff off like for the whole weekend? that that would be another way to bring in temperance. And I love the Chariot card. I love that go, that is my energy. I'm a passionate fire trailblazing woman, but what could it be like if the go was just like riding this beautiful wild wave rather than the push? And I want to embody that this year.
Yeah. It really feels like the invitation of pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, oh, that weekend
Yes.
time's going to be so pleasurable. How do I focus
Yes.
on that instead of
Yes.
focusing on what's being left undone? Even though
Yes.
you and I both know the to-do list never ends, so
Yeah.
there's really no done.
You have hit the nail on the head with the pleasure piece because that's what's been the most interesting thing. One of the questions you asked before this was, what was the one juice? There was one question, juice, something that was
Oh, what's so edgy about
the vulnerable thing and the edgy thing.
yeah.
So one of the things that I've been becoming aware of with this pattern is that with my passion being put into my work and in my creation, that second chakra energy has absolutely affected pleasure. It's affected my ability to, I'd say, almost like taste food and even intimacy, like where I used to be really on fire there. I am so on fire with my work and I love it. I love my community and everything that's birthing. And I'm like, okay, I'm seeing how the pleasure center, it's like, it's off because the passion in this is it's dominating my brain state. So that's the vulnerable piece. That's the thing where I can feel you. You asked earlier how you're getting off, and my nervous system tells me, and I can tell with my senses like what's dialed down and what's dialed up, and that's one of them. So
Mm-hmm. And that's that somatic piece as well. It's like
mhm.
coming back into the body and remembering, oh, I'm actually here to have a good time. I'm here to enjoy this precious container and like I was built to have orgasms and to like feel good and stretch and yeah, reclaiming that for yourself.
Right, right. And
Hmm.
I can, yeah, I notice how we can have so much passion and deliciousness in one aspect of our life, and yet it can cause an imbalance in some of our other senses. And that's one of the things that I've definitely noticed, especially the last couple of months with this big launch push and how curious that is in my nervous system that I can be in passion and yet not feel as much pleasure. And it's super interesting.
Mm-hmm. Would you say it's a normal state of the human brain to just like have that goal and just be always
Yes.
pushing? Or is that something we've been trained to do from our educational
I
system?
think it's absolutely ingrained, trained. Yeah, because typically, like, we have these like let's think anciently. We're back in the fields. We have a push to work a few hours, and then we come back and rest, and we're with our family. There's like this work, family, eat, even a siesta during the day sometimes. And there was a lot more rhythm, and we have lost our rhythm. And a lot of that is our lighting, the frequencies, all the things that inform our circadian rhythm are also disrupted. And that's what helps us to ebb and flow and to push and relax. So we're just getting disrupted in a lot of ways in our nervous system right now, and in our programming with school, and you go and finals and study and all this stuff that we've been ingrained with. So it's multifactorial for sure.
Mm-hmm. And what's so funny is I know these things and yet I still feel my brain resisting because I'm like, oh, I could just put myself into my rhythm, right? But it's not. It's like a chemical
Mhm.
flood that occurs in the brain
Yes.
based on our environment that we may or may not have a ton of control over unless
Yes.
we're aware of it.
Yes. Yes. And you'll feel it when, if you should be unwinding and you can't unwind, or, it should be, yeah, when you can't quite relax, or in the morning, especially when you can't get up. And yeah, our melatonin production should be going down, the sun lights up, and we're just off. We're tired. So we're tired and we're wired. And then, that's how there's like a chemical imbalance in addition to just that programming that's in there of go, go, go. It's a huge issue. It's a huge issue.
Mm. And then we self-medicate with sugar and caffeine
Mhm.
and all of the other things and we call them addictions, but it's really actually just self-help.
Yeah. Yeah. It's how we're
Mm-hmm.
coping. It's how we're getting our needs met and
Mm.
being able to show up. Hmm.
So
Hmm.
much compassion for these little animal bodies.
I know. I know. I know. I mean, even in myself, I'm highly aware of my nervous system, and I can feel the dopamine addiction to this. I can feel
Mm.
as I'm going to reach for it, the brain like, oh, did they write me back? Like I can feel and it's like, oh my gosh, with all of my awareness, and I'm really aware of my body that way, how hard that would be, especially for kids who've got no awareness. And it's like, it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue.
I'm trying to also not label it as well. Like I've caught myself going down that rabbit hole of what's this doing to my teenage boys, right? And how are their brains being damaged? Like I have a lot of negativity
Mhm.
around media in my brain. And yet I watch them and they operate differently from me. And I don't know if it's good or bad. And I'm doing air quotes for those of you who can't see me. Because I don't believe in good and bad, but like they can literally look at their phone and carry on a conversation. Like their brain seems quite larger in the amount of data that it can receive than mine can. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So I'm curious to see what happens in these new generations and how they adapt to
Mhm.
their environment in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, surely their brain capacity is much greater to do all of this. And my concern is, like, at least with my kids, I feel like they have a hard time, like, oh, what am I going to go outside and play? Like they almost like can't quite find that creative. Like we used to play outside all day and make up games. I'm seeing a lack of ability of, I would call it access to that right prefrontal cortex, which is what can I do with nothing around me but sticks and rocks. And you give them a few days and they can fall into it, but I'm noticing that there are certain things that are slowing down in the capacity with kids to be able to be creative. Also being in their body and feeling their feelings, I think, is really difficult for a lot of kids. um yeah, so there's there's going to be some type of consequence when we have digital devices. And at the same time, you're right, they have more capacity than we do. And I don't know, it's just about awareness and helping them to become aware as they can so they can manage whatever the future holds for their body and their
Hmm.
brain.
Totally. I hear you. Like, mm-hmm. it's so nuanced because I don't want to judge because I don't know what the future of our species is. I don't know what we're moving towards. I'm really into the gene keys, you know. I don't know
Mhm.
if you've,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and so some of the things I've read in there, I'm like, oh, well, maybe I just don't need to hold that worry in
Yeah.
my body. Maybe I need to focus on my own shit and like rewiring my brain, right? Oh, that's interesting. Mm. Well, feeling back into that chariot card, I'm curious if you could give us like a somatic description of the chariot. What does chariot look and feel like?
It's the feeling I mentioned to you this, I mentioned this to you before we got on live, of being uncontrolled, and yet you're going in a direction that you know the universe is bringing you in, like maybe like riding a surf wave. The
Mm,
wave, you cannot control that wave, but because you're choosing to ride it and you're choosing to say yes to the fact the wave picked you up and you're upright on the board, you can maneuver it. But if you lose your presence or you lose your focus on how the wave might be shifting you, you could fall. That's probably the best way that I could describe Chariot and my energy archetype that I live a lot. I feel like the universe is always picking me up and pushing me in a way. And then it's my job to keep upright on that surfboard. And I'm hoping some more temperance can give me a little more pleasure in that ride. Here you will.
yeah, yeah. Well, then to give that mirror image, what does temperance look and feel like in your body? Like when you really drop in to that idea of just calmly pouring water from one cup to the other
Hmm.
in like a steady rhythm.
Well, I immediately move my awareness center into my trunk and my chest. I can feel when I am in temperance, when I am filling myself and creating the balance in my life, I'm much more aware of my chest center. I'm I'm able to smell more. I can feel that my senses are kind of kicking in. And so it feels like I am in my reality rather than I'm just producing reality or something. Like I feel a
Mm,
reflection. I'm experiencing. I guess I'm more the experiencer, not just the like doer. The experiencer. That kind of languaging is what hits. But it's
mm,
I feel more alive. Um, I feel like there's a playfulness that's kind of coming in when I'm able to embody temperance. Mostly it's just, this human body actually getting to be a receiver of experience starts to activate a bit more. My guess is on that
mm,
surfboard, I'd feel little splashes of water and smell the salt a little more and feel the wind and the sun and not just be like, steering the surfboard. Yeah.
And sometimes you're riding the wave, and sometimes you're just laying on your board, maybe,
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
coasting a little bit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love that.
I love that imagery. And yeah, I just love you bringing in the body. Automatically, you started talking, and I was like, I can smell the salt air too. Like, oh, we're supposed to witness this experience, not just like, I don't know, when I'm in that push or when I witness that push in others, it's like we're riding on the front of the experience. We're future tripping so hard,
Yeah.
we're not really even feeling what's actually going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially as to-dos and deadlines and things like that, creep up
Mhm.
but I'm also so grateful because I've lived the part of my life where I felt like the universe wasn't pushing me anywhere. I was just stagnant and sick and in bed. And, so I just want to like, that's, that was a whole different journey. So I feel really grateful that I do get to ride this chariot at this stage. It's been wild and
Mhm.
amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and to just like, I remember you in those beginning years. I remember being with you sitting on the floor during a dance and just like the capacity was to take in the energy of the room and not
Yeah.
actually move your body.
Yeah.
And so to be able to watch you literally heal yourself over these months and years and reclaim that vitality is pretty spectacular.
Mm. You were such an incredible space holder for me during those
Mm.
times. I remember that you made it okay that maybe I couldn't dance like everyone else, that I was still expressing my five rhythms while being there in that dance class, and took away a lot of the shame for me in that stage where I still got to enjoy and move energy through me. So thank you for that.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like I've had an opportunity to experience some of that as I've gone through my COVID healing journey as
Mhm.
well. And just, yeah, what came through so clearly was, oh my gosh, so much of what I'm experiencing is actually the heaviness of shame and the resistance to what is.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
not allowing my body to simply have a time where it just needs to slow down
Mhm.
and be with itself and repair.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. We end up resisting our bodies. And why is it doing this? Why won't it get its energy back? What's wrong with it?
Right. Yeah, that languaging and then it just perpetuates, well, there's something wrong with me. I'm wrong. This is
Mm-hmm.
wrong.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Looking back on those years of illness for you, are you able to hold them without judgment at this point in your
Oh,
journey?
yeah. I mean, that was a huge part of the repatterning. It was such a beautiful time where life, the universe at that time, I wasn't being forced up onto a surfboard. I was put into a cocoon.
Mm.
That was my time of a cocoon. And I had to really see and sit with things that I never wanted to sit with as a child.
Mm.
And my beautiful higher self said, "No, sweetheart, you didn't sit with yourself then, and no one sat with you then. And so you're going to sit with you." And that's all I could do for a long time was sit. And in that time, so many things resurfaced that I had to learn how to be with and feel and, embody because I couldn't back then. And I really believe that I partnered with these pathogens like Lyme and mold and all of that to birth my higher consciousness. It broke my brain. And thankfully, because my brain had a hardcore protector, had a bunch of dysfunction in it, and all of that inflammation, if you will, broke it down, broke
Mm.
it down. And once I was broken sufficiently, then I was allowed to rewire it. So I look at it differently. I'm sad about things I missed out on. I'm sad about my kids really didn't have much of a mother for several years of their life. I'm sad that in my 30s I wasn't more active and stuff, but I went on the inevitable journey that we all go on at some point. And now in this timeline, I get to be a space holder. And I'm so grateful for this calling. Alongside you, Wild, we're called in this time to help, the world get through their birthing pains of this shift in consciousness and perspective and reality. So now it feels worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, thank you for that really humble and vulnerable share of that experience because I know that story of time is so tender, the time lost and the time not spent well. And I'm just here to affirm for you that it was spent exactly right because you're shining.
Thank you. As are
Yeah.
you. As
Yeah.
are you.
Mm. Well, as we're coming to the end of our time, I would love, love, love if you could share what your offering is right now. I know you've been working so hard the last few months to kind of bring it all together and create this masterpiece of a platform that can really support people through the entire journey. Would you be open to
Thank
that?
you. Yeah, I recently launched the Primal Trust Academy and Community. And really, it's a conglomeration of everything that I have been doing as far as courses. I have a deep 5-month mentorship called the Primal Trust Mentorship, and I have advanced teachings I call Living Alchemy teachings. And it's one big membership where it's all included. I made it pretty low monthly rate. So instead of buying separate courses on nervous system regulation, brain retraining, it's all just one monthly membership. And I, do all my coaching there. We've got classes every single day of the week. I've got 7 or 8 mentors alongside me teaching. And it's a great place if you're dealing with nervous system regulation issues, chronic trauma patterns, and chronic illness. It's just an all-in-one platform where I provide a roadmap where you work through the different steps of, I call them step 1, 2, and 3, but you're working through the process of first, regulating your nervous system, then going in and doing the inner work of attachment repair, and then the third stage of emerging into the world and, completing that breaking the relationship with the brainstem programming and going into the world with your offering. And it's just been wonderful. It's been, I had a pilot program I tested the last year. It's been awesome. So I just launched it, and it's taking up all my time, as you're hearing from my from this podcast, but it's my purpose. And I feel so honored and blessed that I've gotten to the place where I can provide this kind of platform and healing tools, tools that I spent a lot of money on, and I wish that everyone had, so that they don't have to spend all those years that I did sick. And yeah, that's my aim, is to help people with their transformation process and get them back out in the world.
Yes, and you're doing it. I've read so many glowing reviews. Like people are really transforming in your container.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I can't believe that I went through all of that, just to be able to help, hundreds of others now do the same. It feels so worth it.
So worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm, thank you. Yeah. And so we'll
Yeah.
put links to all of that in the show notes. Do you want to just call out what the web address is?
Sure. It's my name, Cathleen King, Kathleen with a C, so Cathleen King.com, and everything's there. And
Mm.
I also just want to say thank you, WYLD, for your support and your readings. They really helped me to be able to birth my work. Truly, they helped me to see patterns that I was in that I couldn't see my own, and what was to come. And I have been very mindful of them. Your work is really powerful. And it's not just that, it's your transmission and the presence that you bring. And I just want to thank you for that, for being a midwife to me in times that I needed that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. You're bringing tears to my eyes. Thank you. I so appreciate those words, truly. And it's such a gift and such an honor to watch you, my dear friend, rise and rise and rise. It's just, there's just so much space for all of us. And I'm so
Yes.
excited to see a culture that is whole and healthy. And with your work and my work and others who
Mm-hmm.
are on this path, that's what we're moving towards.
Yeah. And these communities. And I really think that the more that we communities collaborate, that makes this ecosystem. Like if there's a community and they're in animosity to the other communities around them, they'll die out. But these communities that are up and rising, supporting each other and sharing those resources and coming together, and you know I might be helping to regulate someone's nervous system, and they move into your work, or vice versa, and it's so beautiful. And I'm a big fan of the gene keys too, and my pearl is 45, which is about communion and the sharing of resources. And that's my ultimate key. And, you know, having this experience with you helps me to live that purpose and
Mm.
experience that pearl.
Amazing. Yes, yes. I love that. Oh, so good. So fun. Yay. And so, for those of you who are listening, if you are in Wild Moon Medicine Collective for Women, Dr. Kat will be joining us later this year.
Yeah.
with some of her medicine, which will be really fun to jump into. And I hope that I can bring you back on the podcast again
Anytime.
another day as you
Anytime.
birth more excitement and more juicy things.
Anytime. And likewise, I'd love to have you come bring your medicine to my community. I think it'd be great. For some it will be brand new stuff, but
That's the fun. That's the
yes.
fun. Oh, so good. Thank you so much for your time today. I really,
Yeah,
really appreciate you.
welcome.